Question, what is the ideal birth, feels incredibly loaded, I'm sure, for all of us. I'm going to answer this question more from a personal point of view, more of a theological point of view, since that's my background. But to me, the ideal birth is characterized by three things, and I want to pose that the first two produce the third. So the two things are ideal births are safe for mother and baby, and then second, reverence is given to the sacredness of the event. And that can take many different forms, right? But that produces three, the effective presence and peace in the mother, so that she can welcome her child from that place. I really find the current discourse around birth to be really difficult. It can be very socially isolating. For me and my peers, we're quickly sorted into camps. And I know we've been speaking a lot about camps and silos today, so I'm grateful to kind of be contributing to that. And I think that's reflective of many areas of our current climate. But for my first birth, I actually chose to pursue an unmedicated birth at an independent birth center in my area. And this is something I made with full knowledge of what I was choosing, right? But it's an experience I'm grateful for, but it was very traumatic for me. I did not have a good experience with that birth. I did not feel like I welcomed my daughter from a place of presence and peace, and I did not feel safe or cared for. So that really led me to reevaluate what I considered to be safe for me in birth. And for my second birth, I ended up electing a hospital birth attended by midwives, and I elected to be medicated. And this was a really wonderful experience for me. I felt like I welcomed my son from that place of presence and peace that I was hoping for, and I felt incredibly cared for and incredibly supported by all of the staff that attended my birth, which is a gift. And I'm a lifelong Roman Catholic, so that's the theological lens I come from. And it's the lens through which I try to approach all my decisions. But that's also the social circle I find myself in, for the most part, is young Catholic women. And I find that social circle tends very much towards natural unmedicated childbirth as the ideal. And so when I chose something different for my second birth, I was quickly met with a lot of questioning and actually a lot of judgment as a result, and treated like I was weak or failing. And this was really discouraging for me, and very difficult to overcome. I had to pray a lot about my decisions. And my spiritual director was a huge help at this time, but I was sharing all of this, like, am I a failure? Am I not courageous enough for not wanting to elect an unmedicated birth again? And so many of my friends pursue home births or births at birth centers, which I applaud and I support, and I can't say I wouldn't choose that myself again. I'm open to change, but I think their advocacy for their own births could cause them to look down on my birth. And so I had to hold on to that phrase of the Lord wants a springtime with me, and this is where he's leading my heart, is to choose it this way. But it seems to me that in my social circle, oftentimes the ideal birth, again, is unmedicated outside the hospital system. And some of my friends choose that because they have, just like I experienced a traumatic birth in one space, they have experienced a traumatic birth in a hospital setting. So they're choosing what is now safest to them. And again, I applaud that choice. The fact that I'm sitting up on the stage is a little funny, like, just be careful what you write on Substack, because you might get asked to come to a conference and defend it if you're friends with Leah. So,
FOL.
Yes, exactly. But like I said, my personal experience has been that of judgment for not pursuing birth a certain way. And I know that pendulum swing goes both ways, right? I know that my friends who have pursued unmedicated births in settings outside hospitals have been treated like they're foolish or stupid or not prioritizing their baby's safety. But I also know the judgment that I experienced was that I was also foolish and stupid and not prioritizing my baby's safety. So a perfect birth in a post-lapsarian state I don't think can exist. And that's why I think the ideal birth is so varied. Is because different women anticipate different realities of life in different ways, right? And we can change our minds, and failures happen, emergencies happen, and I don't think it's right or safe, actually, to treat birth like an emergency inherently, but to also not recognize that emergencies do happen, I think, is imprudent. So, to me, the ideal birth upholds the dignity that mothers are walking into a life of grief. and a life of transformation, and what sets them up best to receive their child and walk into that. And so that's why I placed that final emphasis on presence. What birth allows a woman to be fully present to the reality of transformation that's happening to her and that's coming to her.
Hi, I'm Tammy. I am so blessed to have followed you. So it leads into an ideal birth, and coming from a midwife that is building up a birth center, you'd think that I'd say, well, the ideal birth is an unmedicated mama who has this great birth. And yes, that's wonderful. But truly, the ideal birth takes the mom as number one and puts her wishes and her needs above those of their self. Because we have to listen. If we don't listen to the mom, there's not an ideal birth, because we're putting what we need above her. And I think that what happened many years ago in the hospital is that I got a little jaded, because I saw the physicians around me putting their needs above their patients. And not all of them. I love that you've done home births. That's amazing. Yes. But it's so true, because I'd have a doctor come in and he'd say, you know, I'm taking to my wife at dinner at 7, and you're not going to check her next hour. I'm going to check her, and she's not going to change, and we're doing a C-section at 5:30 because I need to get out of here. And he was serious. And that happens. And it's sad, because we're not honoring these women. And the U.S. has one of the worst morbidity and mortality in the world. And we need to do better. We need to do better for our women. We need to listen to our women. We need to listen to them if they've been sexually traumatized and they want to go straight for a C-section. That's okay. So the ideal birth is a conversation between the provider and that woman, allowing for as good as we can do to keep them both healthy mentally, spiritually, and physically. And so it's that mind, body, spirit all together. And, looking at statistics, birth centers do very well. Hospitals need to do better. We need to do better. We need to do better for our women. But, trying to get this birth center off the ground, I do want to say that we're a good option. So, we have to listen to, research, more research, listen to women, and give these women the ideal birth that they'd like. And that may mean medication. It may mean that your next birth is not. But you have to take that woman in the season where she's at. And you have to be open to having that good discussion with them and educate them. So educating, which Guiding Star, we start young, and we want to educate these women about their body, about the natural processes, about why. Why would this be better? Why should we try for better? Because we want you to feel empowered. And I say so many times that when a woman has that ideal birth, whether it's with an epidural, because I'm working in a hospital now also, the moment that they do it their way, the awe that you see come over them is just a blessing. It's a spiritual moment. And that's what I love about birth.
Both of those were wonderful. So I'm Serena Sigillito. And as I was preparing for this panel and kind of meditating on the question of what is an ideal birth, an analogy kept coming back to me from my Catholic faith. Because the Catholic Church teaches as dogma that celibacy is objectively the highest vocation. That is the ideal vocation. But I was not called to be celibate, right? It was not the ideal vocation for me. That's not what God wanted for me. It's not the way that God wants me to achieve that level of holiness that celibate people are also called to. And so I think Catholicism is really helpful in helping us hold paradoxical truths in tension with one another, right? And I think we need to do that with birth, and especially when you're distinguishing between building a medical system and encountering an individual woman, you have to be able to say, like, on a theoretical ideal level, a physiologic birth is the ideal. But for any particular woman, in the wholeness of her personal trauma, her particular medical history, any complications that are arising, that absolutely may not be the ideal for her. And it's a disservice to her to push that ideal on her. So I think that's kind of a big picture, something to keep in mind. So in light of that paradox, I want to propose that an ideal birth is one in which those who care for the mother encounter her and care for her in the fullness of who she is. And by doing that, they can allow her to access the deep embodied feminine power of her body while also accepting her mortality, her frailty, her vulnerability as a human being. And I think in order to do that well, a care provider has to have, even whether they can articulate it or not, they have to have an accurate vision of what it means to be a human being and what it means to be a mother in particular. And there are a lot of, I think our mainstream medical system is built upon a deeply impoverished philosophical anthropology that sees the human being, right? It's a technocratic system that sees the body as a machine, right? That functions or malfunctions in predictable ways, that is disconnected from the mind. And it also sees the person as kind of an atomistic individual, right? Like, rather than being embedded in a web of relationships. And so I think that in order to support a woman, care providers need to resist those two temptations that our medical system is pushing them into acting in accordance with. So I do want to take a moment to acknowledge that in a fallen world, even though our bodies were designed to give birth, the reality is that birth can be very dangerous. Medical interventions are sometimes necessary, and they can save lives. And I know that from experience. I have given birth 3 times. I have 3 daughters. And I've never gotten an epidural, but I've never had a totally ideal physiologic birth. There were complications that occurred in all 3 of those. With my first, I developed gestational hypertension at the end of the pregnancy. I was induced, and then I had excessive bleeding immediately afterwards. With my second, the labor itself was beautiful and peaceful, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that and the way I was supported in that. But then after I gave birth, I labored during transition in the tub, and I got out and I got on all fours, and I pushed once, and my baby was born en call, and placed on my chest, and then I experienced a severe life-threatening postpartum hemorrhage. I had to have 4 different medications, and then a euphemistically named intrauterine massage, where my midwife stuck her hand up into my uterus and got it to, because it stopped contracting. Way more painful than giving birth. And then with my third daughter, I had hypertension from the beginning, and I developed preeclampsia. So anyway, I've had medical complications, but still, those birth experiences were so different. And to me, my second birth with my daughter, Cora, who's 7 now, was my ideal birth, in spite of that life-threatening postpartum hemorrhage. And I want to unpack that a little bit, because I think the reason why it was such a beautiful and healing experience for me was because of the way it was accompanied and cared for. We've all sort of used words like sacred when we talk about birth. And I think that we live in a deeply secular culture where we think of the physical world as being kind of devoid of meaning, right? They're just material things that we can shuffle around, meat Legos, as Mary Harrington would say. But birth is what there's a historian called Charles Taylor, and he talks about where the transcendent breaks through into the secular world at certain thin places, and I think that birth is a thin place where there's a moment to confront some deep transcendent truths about the nature of reality and about who we are. And I think some of the truths that we're being confronted with are going to be different. For some people, you know, Lisa's talk this morning was so much about, or this afternoon, was about kind of claiming autonomy and strength and power. And I think for some women, that capacity to power through and to feel that power of their body is what they need to learn from that. I think other times you have to understand the depth of our dependence and vulnerability and accepting help, you know, saying, I can't do this. I need someone to take care of me. But you need to be in a space where you feel safe and respected and encountered and accompanied. So I think these two probably have a lot more wisdom than I do in terms of how we can reform our medical system, because I think that even care providers who have that vision, when you're working within our standard maternal medical system, it's really hard to do that simply because you don't have the time for one thing, like with the patients or there. So I'd be interested to hear some of the ideas for how we can make this kind of birth accessible to more women.
It's a joy to be the caboose of this incredible train in front of me. And I mean it with all deep heart. The language they use, I can't do any better, and I'm going to try not to speak too long because I really want to hear these questions and get on these other issues of how do you do this. Ultimately, to get to the end of this, how do you transform the system? Yeah. You witness it. When language and logic no longer matter and science becomes the king, people are intrinsically awkward, and you have to witness it. Guiding Star Tampa, Guiding Star places everywhere. They're in communities, and they're all a little different, but they're all the same, and they try to have the same heart. And I want to thank Leah. I think I met her over 2 decades ago in a hotel in Los Angeles. And to see a conference like this just a few years later is healing for me, because I was medically trained and I bought into the lies. And I grew up in a great family. I went to the March for Life. I grew up Catholic, said prayers and rosary and Bible strong, and I ended up in the slop because medicine is nothing more than a point of service. And it's not relational, it's accessing a service, and it's broke. Now, restoring trust in birth and restoring trust. If you noticed, everybody up here said, create a little space so God can work. It's really hard to do that, because in order to work with people, and I've seen Hillary Clinton people in my office, even though we have a faith-based practice, because I've done a lot of stress work. I do a lot of cortisol, DHEA, adrenal fatigue, thyroid, hormones, ovary, testicle, balancing hormones, what T. Kenny does, or Katie Vidmar. But I did it in medicine. I worked with Ina May Gaskin in the Appalachian Mountains doing home births. But I was a communist then, and she and I were both pro-abortion. But as I got to know her, one of her last forewords of one of her books, she was pro-life, and she actually refused at the end of her life to allow any emetagogues, any herbs, any black cohosh, blue cohosh, whatever we were using at the time, to be used to stop, intentionally kill the life within the womb. And yet, you know, God's a funny dude. He heals us. He's healed me just by being here. Now, I'm an old white guy. When I go speak at medical schools, I jokingly say sometimes, to kind of break the ice, that I'm identifying as a woman today. Why? Well, because of those cool t-shirts that everybody should buy in the back. But I did, I already got one. It's gonna fit. I'm gonna have to stay on my ketogenic diet to work it in. However, I've delivered hundreds of home births. Why? Because when I was pro-life at the time, so I changed in '89, I went to go start a job, and they told me, you're gonna be out of business in 2 months. Join us, we'll increase market share, and you can just work for us. Why? Because I do fertility awareness-based methods. I do natural childbirth. I do medicated childbirth. When you talk about an ideal birth, they already said, I don't need to say anything more. It's varied, it's sundry. Why? Because it's about accompaniment. In good medicine today, we listen, we learn, and we love. So what I talk about is, when I talk about medicine as mercy, health is relational. It's a relationship. That's what, when you have a young student in her medical training, and there was only one way to do things, right? It's abortion, contracept, shut off the brain from 12 to 60. Only let them come off once, maybe, because we have an overpopulation. It was just one way. Think of COVID. If you had any deviation, you got pilloried. And yet, there's blessings on both sides. I delivered our second child. We have 2 boys. I developed metastatic cancer after that, so I didn't have any more. But my wife wanted really a good delivery. Now, we were in the hospital because she was also traumatized. And with a long labor, early induced, forceps, pushing on the fundal pressure. So what I want to end with, my first point is that it's live at the Improv. But everything you heard in my area, it's Lisa, right? So that's going to lead me into my second point about accompaniment and encounter. The words that the eggheads and the writers, do you know she's an editor, right, of a magazine, and she's trying to find common language. When I know that Leah, from the first day I met her, wanted to knock down freaking silos, yes, that's the answer. But you can't do it a lot through argument, even though I value these arguments and I believe in them. But in the end, until you heard the experiential heart of these women, and now this kind of woman, no, this man, it's a matter of the heart. Health is relational, medicine's an act of mercy, hate disease, but love patients. Children are not sexually transmitted diseases, but that's how I treated them until I had my academic abortion and breast cancer, abortion and preterm birth, abortion and mental illness. Preterm birth was in there. And in that academic, there was my own experience of my heart getting hardened. And then lastly, I needed a witness. Another doctor saying to me, you're better than this. Or a friend saying, you're better than this. And then you had a question, an opportunity to question what you believed in. So I'm going to close off on this segment just by saying that because I've been doing stress work from day one, I didn't want to. Woman comes in and she says, there's something wrong with me. I go to my doctor and he measures my labs and he says that there's nothing wrong with me. And I've got foggy thinking and dry skin and constipation and I don't like sex anymore and my hair's falling out and I'm just falling over and I'm exhausted. Yeah. And when you start having lots of homeschoolers who come to you, they hit the wall occasionally because they're incredible people and they know how to budget their time. And so it's about accompaniment. So it's body, soul, and spirit. You do it through hormonal analysis to balance hormones. You do it through conversation. You literally do it through, because you have to create a safe space. When I talk to medical students, they have to believe that my alternative view of reproductive health can be something they should think about, because they immediately attack you and calumniate you. Well, no, you create a conversation in a space, and you do that with accompaniment and IFS. I didn't realize what I was doing for 35 years, but that's what it was. It was body, soul, and spirit. Then you pray with people or meditate. There is a higher power. You're not it. You meet people where they're at. And yet it goes right along with I've been in many churches. I see unity where a lot of people see diversity. I absolutely believe that it's consistent with the biblical outlook. And the nuances are the conversations that you get. So after they yell at you in the class, they literally will take you out for a beer, a scotch, or a water afterwards because you didn't talk down to them, but to them. And it works with patients, with my female or male patients. It works with other doctors because you listen to their story. Tell me what's going on. Sit with me. I want to look into your eyes. I want to see your gaze. Secondly, you learn their story because you don't know what words trigger them. You don't. And so because the sexual revolution left us with autonomy, equality, and sexual license, there were some fancy words here that were beautiful, better than me explaining it. But no, it's about collaboration, cooperation, and about empowerment. It really is. And that's why body literacy and this connection here is also outstanding. I'm going to leave it at that, and I hope you all have some questions, and I'm just grateful to be here.